Bismillah, the treatment of definition and simple apprehension is really an exercise to establish one of the most fundamental realities that the classification project is involved with, which is establishing that things have realities and that they're knowable. This is important for so many reasons, and the work has an introduction which engages with the wider context, because the context that we're in almost universally denies this. One way that someone can see that is that, for instance, David Hilbert, in his reworking of logic, evacuated all of the meanings from his logic, such that if he was to speak of a point and a line and a plane, there is literally no mental content to this. And this is the foundation for the technology and the world that we're in. So there's a fundamental change which has taken place, which affects the ethical order and the other orders. So this paper attempts to not escape the reality which is in front of us, because that is what is going to be in all of our imaginations as we engage with the book. The value is a return, again addressed in the introduction, a return to intellect, a return to form, the form that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us, which is the basis for our knowledge, whether we accept that or not. And this takes us into the realm of objective or trans-subjective truth. And putting, and I think this is important for this stage of the project, putting logic in the context of metaphysics and first principles. Logic is, unlike contemporary logic, not floating in space. It is built on metaphysics, and it takes nothing for granted. If we return to the major manuals in our tradition, we see that, and that was part of the task. Part one of this work, just so that the structure is clear and the discussion is not separate from the book itself, is the actual operation of definition. And it's important in a world where all of our sciences have the essential components and the intelligibility depleted from them. It sounds like a large claim, but we need to get our hands dirty. Logic is a general tool. We don't want it to remain abstract. We want to get back to being able to perfect this human organ, which is the intellect, and that cannot happen for operating sciences that don't have that. When I looked for the answer in our tradition for how do we know the essential properties of things, how do we grasp their form and nature and their objective reality, initially I turned to logic manuals and had to recognize that in the history of our logic manuals, that the subject of definition, being the tool for producing simple apprehension. So how do we, the word for simple apprehension in Arabic is tasawwur. It means for the form of extramental objective being to occur in my mind. The instrument for that is definition. Logic is the general instrument for knowledge. However, in our manuals, this instrument had drifted from being in the book of demonstration and material logic. It had drifted into a brief summary where the logic books did not contain the full organon. Rather, they are divided into simple apprehension and propositions. And I think it's worth noting that most of us, when we engage with truth, we mean propositional truth. It's almost a blind spot in our education system. So I'll just say a few more comments about the structure, part one and part two of the book. part one, then, in order to establish that we can know things, we have to realize that the place for the way to know things is not abstraction. Many of us think that the way that we would come to obtain this intellectual knowledge of the experimental realities is through abstraction. That's not the case. So we have to go and look at the faculties which initially sense and then experience and what they're capable, and also how modern science has viewed primary and secondary sensibles. And there is a great inversion that's taken place. Okay, so I can sense only particulars, etc. How do I get from there to the intellectual content? Well, that is the aim of the book, to show that. And the answer for that then is properly in what was traditionally called the posterior analytics. It's one of the parts of the organon which deals with material logic. And inside of that, the question is, how do we gain these essential attributes which become the first principles for true sciences? And that requires not deduction, which we're always busy with. We're always moving from what we either think we know, or what we've nominally defined, or what we have defined in terms of modern science, which deals with quantity and phenomena and relation, which are not the essential attributes of anything. The way to grasp them is a form of reasoning which moves in. That's called induction, and it cannot take logic for granted, so it has to be a way of grasping the first principles. That's what the book sets out. Most of these things are in our tradition. Some of them I had to go back to the original thinkers that coined them in order to defend the panoply, or just the cornucopia, whatever you want to call it, the immense, copious amounts of misconceptions at each step of the road about how we come to know things. And the fact that it's not known is a bit surprising. There is a book many students of knowledge have read called the Nibros. And in this book, after it talks about things having realities and their knowability, it says that it turns to idrak, perception. And it says that to treat this properly would need a full volume. So that volume, to my knowledge, is not present. Let me accelerate slightly and just say that this work is a philosophical engagement, but it's an engagement in truth, which is part and parcel of religion. We cannot move from imitation to knowledge without true knowledge. So the first section of the part one of the book, the operation of definition, defends the proposition that we can make valid inference to the intelligible properties of things from sensation. Not directly, but using induction, etc. And in that instance, Kant and neo-Kantians that inform the social sciences, humanities, and natural science are set up as a counter-thesis, and that counter-thesis is driven into a reductio ad absurdum. It's shown to be false. And I'll just end with a quick comment on part 2 and part 3. Part 2 looks at the form of definition. What are we doing when we define? Because we've lost this faculty for knowing the essential properties and the intelligible realities. So it brings effectively what we might call a tahqiq, that when we are defining, we are predicating the essential properties of things onto them, and also their quiddity. That we are saying that, for instance, the absolute quiddity of Zaid is human, so that we understand how to defend that, and then we have to defend that these are intelligible properties. They have to be essential, because a true definition is supposed to bring the reality before my mind. If we look at scientific definitions, the properties that they use, like the atomic number of gold, if I know the atomic number of gold is 59, I think it is, or 95, whatever it is, it doesn't actually cause the reality to be formed in front of my intellect. So there's a massive problem there. Part 2 is an argument, and again, it is that Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. The nominalist argument is that Bismillah. Let me mention part 3 and close there. So part 3 is a set of doubts, some of them from in our tradition, some of them from mystical tradition. These matters have to be engaged with for us to be putting our work forward as a tahqiq, so that it's not merely a half-baked opinion. And as Dr. Karim has reminded us many times, there is a psychological disposition, and Sheikh Hassan has pointed out that we live in a time of voluntarism. We're predisposed to repel any argument about objective truths. So it was necessary to engage with the different points of view. That's what the paper has done, and inshallah with the madad of our mashayikh, there is a correct conclusion and tawfiq that it becomes useful for this ummah, inshallah ta'ala.
That's very good.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم صل وسلم بأنواع كمالاتك في جميع تجلياتك على سيدنا ومولانا محمد أول الأنوار الخالقة بالنور عظمة الله المتحقق في عالم البطون والبطون معاني الأسماء والصفات، فهو أول حامد ومتعبد بأنواع العبادات والقربات والممد في عالم الأرواح والأشباح لجميع الموجودات، وعلى آله وأصحابه صلاة تكشف لنا النقاب عن وجه الكريم في المراء واليقظات، وتعرفنا بك وبه في جميع المراتب والحضرات، والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاهه في الحركات والسكنات واللحظات والخطرات، والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاهه في الحركات والسكنات واللحظات والخطرات، والطف بنا يا مولانا بجاهه في الحركات والسكنات واللحظات والخطرات. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون والسلام على المرسلين الحمد لله رب العالمين. I just wanted to make that prayer on the Prophet in the presence of the true inheritor of the Prophet and one of his sons as well, and get the barakah of that for us all. Esotericism is the belief that the only possible knowledge of God that we can have is knowledge gained by direct spiritual experience. The only knowledge we can have of God and of the metaphysical realm and the unseen is that gained by direct spiritual experience. And the alternative to esotericism is fideism. Fideism is the belief that the only knowledge we can have about God and divine things is that revealed through revelation, wahi. So the first alternative is esotericism. That's the idea that the only knowledge we can have about God and divine things and the unseen is through direct spiritual experience. And the other is fideism, which is the idea that the only direct knowledge we can have about God and the unseen is through wahi, revelation. Now, the position of our tradition was never either of these options. But these two options today have become very, very prevalent amongst Christians in the modern world and amongst Muslims also today. The problem with these two points of view, it might seem to be legitimate when talking about the unseen, that the only possible knowledge you can have of them is through kashf, direct experience, or through wahi. But the problem with that is it cuts off the unseen and all divine things from the world of creation. What it means is that knowledge is not experienced, is not understood as unified and is existing within a single unitary system of knowledge, but rather we can, when it comes to the world, all of our ways of knowing the world become secular. There's secular, there's separated, there becomes a separation between the metaphysical and the spiritual and the revelatory and the world of ordinary experience. What that means is that nothing that we ever say about the unseen can ever be a hujjah when it comes to speaking to people who don't share that spiritual experience or that belief in that revelation. And so you end up with a kind of relativism about anything which pertains to the unseen. So how did this state of affairs come about where this is so prevalent? The major thinker, according to the most dominant accounts of our history, is Luther, because Luther made it very clear that the mind is tainted by original sin. The mind is tainted by original sin. It's only faith, and even faith without a rational basis, and in fact the less rational basis the better sometimes, that can save us. But when it comes to the material world, the aql works for the material world. The aql can actually know the material world, because the material world is accursed. In his own words, it's the playground of Satan. In medieval Catholicism, it was understood to be the theophany, the tajalliyat of God. But in Protestantism, it became, this split took place, very broadly speaking, of course. And so how did we come to this point where even our great ulama in the earlier period struggled greatly with these issues? It's because there was a profound decline in the Western world in the understanding of a world which is a theophany of God, and in which the presence of God and the existence of God can be known by the aql that God created through the world. So this is the situation when colonialism and the importation of Western ideas began in the Muslim world. this is the state of affairs which arrived at them. When you think about people like Sheikh Mustafa Sabri, who received this positivism and was conscious of this positivism and this Kantianism arriving in the Ottoman world and polluting the minds of the intelligentsia and even the scholars. This was really the consequence of hundreds of years of intellectual decline in the West, which was founded in essentially this profound religious turn, which was fundamentally the secular turn, which drove a wedge between that which was that which pertained to the metaphysical and the unseen, and that which pertained to this lower world. And so one of the great problems of the last 150 years is that precisely when we needed our Turath most, there was a profound decline in our knowledge and mastery and the availability of the aqliyat which could answer this current. And so we have this huge moja, this huge wave of influence from the West, which is a context that has no munasab or relevance to the Muslim world, but was associated with taqaddum. As Sheikh Mustafa Sabri said, it wasn't that there was anything wrong with al-ilm al-qadim or they won by an intellectual argument, but rather that they mistook a martial victory, a victory in war, for an intellectual victory. And so at exactly the same time, you had the currents of modernism in the Muslim world, Sheikh Muhammad Abdu, Sheikh Al-Afghani, and who were wholesale trying to import these ideas and depict the Muslim tradition, which has no relationship to that Western historical background, as a takhalluf and as a backwardness. And of course there were great ulama in Al-Azhar, people like Sheikh Abdurrahman al-Shirbini and so on, who responded to him very strongly. But in any case, we have remained within this difficulty and this context despite the great efforts of many of our great ulama, because simply of how overwhelming what we're facing is. We remain in a situation in which the result is that it becomes acceptable to think that our only knowledge of divine things and the unseen is esotericism, or so the belief that our only possible knowledge of divine things and the unseen is kashf and spiritual experience, and then the world, we just deal with it in terms of science, modern science, or whatever it happens to be. And alternatively, which is more associated with let's say the Salafiyya and the other movements, is the idea that only revelation is our only possible source of knowledge of the unseen. And the problem with this is it takes away the ability of Muslims to understand their religion in terms of the aql, and also to explain it to others in terms of the aql. So we fall victim to precisely what secularism holds as its ideal, which is that religion becomes a private matter, a matter which is shameful in some way because it has no basis in science, and something which can be tolerated by the very generous powers that be, but should never be brought out into the public. So what was behind, just to close, is this wonderful project which I've been so honoured to be able to participate in, and was really very much from the beginning and throughout the vision and guidance of Dr. Karim Laham, is to revive what was simply the norm in our history and has been the norm throughout our entire history, which is simply that Allah Ta'ala placed a real ma'quliyah, a real intelligibility into the world because He created it, and He created within our minds, because He created it, the capacity to know that world, and not only to know that world, but to know the manner in which, the point at which the sensible world meets the unseen world, that the aql can know, and that point at which the sensible world meets the unseen world, and understand exactly, to transcend the bounds of the sensible world because of the ayat of Allah's existence and His reality, which He has placed within this world. And it really is ultimately no more than the attempt to do that. So I extend my utmost gratitude to Mawlana al-Habib Ali al-Jifri, to Dr. Karim Laham, to Sheikh Mustafa Stayan, to all the other people, Sheikh Ma'an al-Dabbagh, a wonderful descendant of Sheikh Abdul Aziz al-Dabbagh. We're so blessed to be amongst the fragrance and the spiritual guidance and the secrets of the Ahl Bayt under their protection, inshallah ta'ala, despite being profoundly unworthy, unfortunately. And it has just been a great honour. Thank you so much for listening. Sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Muhammad.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.
Peace be upon you and the mercy of God and His blessings.
Alhamdulillah.
Praise be
على
to God
نعمه التي لا تحصى.
for His bounties that are innumerable.
وصلى الله وسلم على مجمع النعم الإلهية سيدنا محمد.
And blessings and peace be upon the one who gathers all the divine bounties, our Master Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa sallam.
وعلى آله وصحبه ومن سار على نهجه إلى يوم الدين.
And upon his family, his companions, and those who travel in his footsteps until the day of judgment.
المدخل إلى ما ود الحديث عنه معكم، أحب أن أشارككم أمرا مررت به خلال الساعة التي مضت.
So before I begin, I'd like to tell you something that I experienced in the last hour or so.
فقيري لما قبل ساعة لم أكن أستطيع الجلوس على الكرسي. الحمد لله.
This poor before God, an hour ago, couldn't even sit up in a chair.
بسبب مرض قديم عندي.
Because of an ongoing and
الحمد لله.
old illness that I've suffered from.
وكنت قد اعتذرت عن الحضور وأحببت أن أتابع حتى لو لم أفهم الإنجليزية بشكل جيد، لكن أحاول ألتقط شيء من هنا ومن هنا وأنال بركة مجلسكم.
I try to watch online so that even though I can't understand everything that was said in English, I'd understand from here and there a word here and a word there, and I wanted to gain some of the blessings of your gathering here.
لكن ما أن توجه سيدي وأخي الدكتور عمر الفاروق ورفع يديه بالدعاء للفقير إلى الله عز وجل بالشفاء، طلب منكم الدعاء وقراءة الفاتحة حتى شعرت بنشاط لم أكن أحده قبلها بثواني يدب في جسدي.
He said, but then when Sayyidi and my brother, Dr. Omar, made a dua, made a prayer and asked you to also recite Fatiha with him during that prayer for my well-being, I felt this vitality pumping through my body that I hadn't felt in a long time.
حتى جربتها أستطيع أجلس وأنا في السرير وجدتني أجلس.
So then when I felt this vitality coursing through my veins, I said, let me try. Can I even sit up in the chair? And as I sat, I managed to sit up.
لماذا أحكي لكم هذه القصة؟
Why am I telling you this?
هي تتصل بما نحن وإياكم بصدده.
Because it has a connection to the subject that we are talking about now.
نحن في زمن الناس تفتقد فيه المعنى.
We're in a time where people have lost meaning.
وأحيانا تسخف المعنى أو تستصغر المعنى.
And at times they belittle meaning.
أو تسخر من المعنى.
Or they mock meaning.
الفقير إلى الله يشعر أن هذا الضجيج من السخرية والتصغير والإعراض تجاه المعنى في باطنه هروب أنفس أمارة بالسوء من أن تواجه من قبل أصحابها بأن تتهذب وتتنقى وتتزكى لتتلقى المعنى.
So sometimes I feel that this cacophony of people who mock and belittle meanings is nothing more than the play of the ego which inclines to evil and not acknowledging that it needs to be purified and cleansed in order to be able to penetrate into meaning and understand meaning.
ترى هذا الساخر الناقم المكذب هناك صراخ في داخله يحاول أن يشغب على قلبه حتى لا ينصت إلى المعنى.
So this person who belittles and mocks and denies, there's a scream inside him from his lower ego that stops him from being able to receive meaning.
لأن المعنى جلي ظاهر في هذا الوجود.
Because meaning and reality is self-manifest in existence.
وفي كل شيء له آية تدل على أنه الواحد.
And in everything there's a sign that indicates he is one.
حتى في عتو أنفسنا آية.
Even in ourselves there's a sign. Even in the rebellion of ourselves there's a sign.
لكن لأنه سبحانه وتعالى الظاهر الباطن القريب العزيز، لم يكن القريب البعيد، القريب العزيز.
But because he is the hidden and the manifest, he is the one who is close, but he is also the one who is august, aziz, majestic. He didn't say he is near and far. He said he is near and he is august and majestic.
اقتضى ظهوره وقربه أن يلوح لك في كل شيء.
His nearness and his manifestness means he is manifest to you in everywhere and in all
في كل
things
وقت.
and at all times
في كل نفس.
and in every breath.
واقتضى كونه الباطن العزيز أن تحتاج إلى جهد، إلى مجاهدة للنفس لتفتح عين القلب لتدرك هذا الظهور الخارق في الوجود.
But his being the hidden and august necessitates that you struggle against yourself to open the eye of your heart in order to see his manifestness that permeates all of existence.
الله أسأل أن يكرمنا وإياكم بتمام ذلك وكمال.
I ask Allah to ennoble us in his magnificence to have that.
في هذه العجالة أود أن نتحدث عن 3 نقاط.
I'm going to quickly discuss 3 points.
فيما يتعلق بهذا الجهد المبارك الذي بذله سيدي كريم، سيدي حسن، سيدي مصطفى، سيدي معا في إدارة البحث عافاه الله، وإخوتنا بتوجيه المشايخ كما سمعنا من كلام سيدي كريم، وبرعاية وتشجيع سيدي عمر فاروق وبقية الأفاضل من أهل العلم والمعرفة.
So in summary, I would like to discuss 3 points. Thanking Sidi Karim, Hassan, and all Sidi Ma'an and Dabbar, may Allah give him shifa, and all the mashayikh who've been involved, Sidi Mustafa and all the mashayikh who've been involved, and their encouragement, Dr. Umar.
3 نقاط. أولها الحاجة. ما هي الحاجة؟ لماذا هذا المشروع؟
So the first point is, what's the need? Why do we need to undertake this project?
النقطة الثانية المسار لهذا المشروع.
The second point is the direction that this project is taking.
النقطة الثالثة الثمرة المرجوة من هذا المشروع.
And the third point is, what's the fruit or what's the result that we hope for from this project?
من هذا الجهد. أما الحاجة
For this great effort.
فالحقيقة أنها حاجة أصلية ليست حاجة ردة فعل، ومن المهم أن يدرك إخوتي وأبنائي من طلبة الدكتوراه والماجستير والدراسات العليا الذين يحضرون الآن والأساتذة أن هذا العمل لم يقوم على أساس ردة فعل تجاه واقع مرير.
So the first thing is, this need is an essential one. It's not a reaction to circumstances.
هي حاجة أصلية.
So it's a foundational need. It's not a reaction to circumstances and the challenges we find ourselves in this time.
وهذه الحاجة متصلة بإحياء أمر تسلسل في هذه الأمة بأسانيد متصلة وبتعاظم في المعرفة وبناء معرفة على معرفة جيلا بعد جيل.
So this is a revival of tradition within our community, which has come and been passed on. It's a revival of a tradition that was passed on generation after generation.
من لدن حضرة النبوة صلى الله عليه وآله.
From the time of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم.
أهل بيته وأصحابه تابعيهم كمل الورثة في كل عصر.
And his family, his companions, those who followed them, and their perfect inheritors in every generation.
بأوجه متعددة من التعبيرات ابتدأت بحال عصر النبوة الجامع الذي تمتزج فيه هذه العلوم والأذواق والمعارف في قالب واحد. تجدها في آية، تجدها في عبارة نبوية.
And it was through the different generations, it was refracted in its different facets. But when we go back to the time of prophecy itself, it was all unified. So you'd find all the meanings encompassed in one verse or encompassed in one saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
ثم عندما انتشر الإسلام وجاءت الناس من ثقافات متعددة واحتيج إلى تصنيف العلوم أيضا والتوسع فيها وازدهار العلوم ونمو العلوم وتطور العلوم، ابتدأ التصنيف للعلوم يأخذ نوعا من الجدية أو من الحدة إن شئت في مفهوم التصنيف. التوصيف.
But as Islam expanded and new communities came on and other cultures came into the faith, the sciences began to proliferate and the subject matters that were covered and the definitions that were given for each subject. And this was a serious undertaking taken by those generations in order to articulate the tradition to these different cultures and taking the language and the other needs into account.
أيضا في مضي البشرية في أطوار من النضج المتعدد.
And he said, and in the history of man, there's been an evolution in man's internal and intellectual growth also that had to.
فجاء تصنيف العلوم الشرعية والعقلية، وفي الشرعية علوم القرآن وعلوم السنة وعلوم الفقه. جاءت العلوم العقلية من الكلام ومن المنطق وأصول الفقه إلى آخر واللغة إلى آخر علوم الآلة وإلى آخرها.
So there were the traditional sciences such as the science of Quran, the science of Hadith, the science of the biographies, and then there were also the rational sciences such as logic and theology and so on, metaphysics. So the sciences took their own definitions and their own roots.
والعلوم المعتنية بتزكية الأنفس والأخذ بأيدي السالكين إلى الله يجمعهم علم بأحوال النفوس والقلوب وحال متصل بهذا العلم ليتحول إلى ارتقاء للذات الإنسانية المتصلة به بهذا العلم. التصوف.
Then there's also the science of self-purification in order to raise the human being to a person who was aware and cognizant of their inner landscape and was transformed in order to reach their higher potential as a human being, and this was the science of tasawwuf.
هذه العلوم كانت ممتزجة، لم يكن تصنيفها إلى علم كذا وعلم كذا وعلم كذا يعني انفصال عن بعضها البعض، يعني أن يكون المتكلم منفصل عن المشتغل بالحكمة، منفصل عن صاحب الحقيقة الصوفية، منفصل عن صاحب العلوم الشرعية. لم يكن الأمر كذلك.
So that these sciences were unified in a person, meaning that a person wasn't a theologian, who wasn't a jurist, who wasn't a person who was into hermeneutics, who wasn't a person who was also a person of the inward science. These were unified.
لكن هذا التقسيم كان لتسهيل الدراسة.
But these differentiate, the way they were differentiated as disciplines was to facilitate their study.
وتسهيل الخدمة.
And also to make it easy for the people teaching them and the people disseminating
أثمرت هذه الحالة من المزج بين العلوم المروية المنقولة والعلوم المعقولة والأحوال القلبية التي أثمرها العمل المخلص لهذه العلوم همة في الصلة في هذا الكون على أساس الصلة بالمكون. فارتقى الناس في صلتهم بالكون وارتقى الكون بهم لأنهم خلفاء الله في الأرض. إني جاعل في الأرض خليفة.
And this coming together, this unification of the traditional, the rational sciences and the purification of the soul, so that it came to live those realities in itself. Those realities were actualized in the human soul. Meant that the human being was raised up, but the cosmos around the human being was raised up because the human being was then able to actualize the purpose of his creation, which was to be a vice-regent of God.
مفهوم الاستخلاف هذا جعل الإنسان يتعامل مع الكون على أنه مؤتمن على الكون وليس مالكا للكون، ليس سيدا للكون.
This understanding of being a caliph, a steward, meant the human being understood that he was responsible, and he had a responsibility to the cosmos, to the world around him, and that he wasn't someone who was there to manage it and oversee it and master the creation around him and subjugate it.
وإن من استخلفه على هذا الكون وضع له منهجا فيه الاعتقاد، فيه الأخلاق، فيه قواعد: كل واشربوا ولا تسرفوا، عدم الإسراف، عدم الإساءة إلى المخلوقات الأخرى، الحفاظ على مقدرات الكون، عدم تلويث الأرض. كل هذه هي جزء من عبادة الله، لا تنفصل عن هذا المعنى. هكذا الأمر.
So this human being saw himself as a trustee in his custodianship to the world around him. So the human being believed certain things, acted in certain ways, and understood that he was not to transgress in the balance in the natural world that was around him. He wasn't supposed to be excessive. He wasn't supposed to squander the world's resources because they weren't for him to squander. These were trusts put under his care.
أرجو أن تتنبهوا لتقارنوا أنتم في أذهانكم بين الرؤيتين. رؤية من يتعامل مع الأرض على أنه مؤتمن عليها ويطيع أمر سيده ويستجلي أنوار سيده فيها، ورؤية من يرى أنه هو سيد الأرض.
That human being did all of this as an act of slavehood to God, and you make a distinction between the human being who lives on earth, seeing himself as a trustee to something to a cosmos that belongs to his maker, and that if he's to discharge this trust well, he will receive from the theophanies of his Lord the illumination that comes. And the human being who sees this earth as something he has dominion over.
كان أحد العلماء التجريبيين المسلمين، أنا أستحي أن أسميه عالم تجريبي، هو عالم حقيقي. العلم التجريبي جزء من مكونه، من اعتنائه من خلال خلافته. كتب إلى أحد الحكام السلاطين الذين دعموه في بناء أحد أوائل المراصد في تاريخ البشرية للكواكب، يقول له: يا سيدي، ما حملني على الاعتناء ببناء هذا المرصد إلا الامتثال لأمر الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه وفي سنة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم.
So one of the Islamic scientists who was a scientist in the experimental method, he said, I don't even want to say he was just a scientist in the experimental method, but he was writing, and he was commissioned to oversee the construction of an observatory. And he wrote to the ruler of his time, and he said, nothing has made me undertake this duty except my acknowledgement of the command of Allah and the sayings of his Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
فهو عندما أقدم على العلوم الطبيعية أقدم عليها من عند ربها،
So this person, when he went into the natural sciences, he went into them from their Lord.
لينطلق بأقصى ما يستطيع من الانطلاق، لكن من خلال صلة بالمقصد من وجوده ومن استخلافه في الأرض ومن عمارة الأرض، لا من مقاصد النفس.
And he took it to its ultimate end because he understood that this was the purpose for which this was created, and it wasn't for his own, it wasn't self-referential, it wasn't something self-referential.
الذي حصل أن هذا التطور ليس لدينا الكثير من الوقت لأبسط الحديث عنه، لكن هذا الترقي الذي حصل جاءت فترة وحصل فيه انقطاع، توقف.
This elevation that happened, it continued for a period, but then there was a point in time when it came to a halt. Things went into a decline.
الوقت لا يتسع للكلام عن ما حاولوا يوسعكم قراءة ذلك والنظر فيه وأنتم أهل.
Time doesn't permit us to go into that in any depth, but you can read the research about the decline and why it happened.
هذا الانقطاع تزامن مع ما حصل هنا في أوروبا.
This halting was contemporaneous to events happening in Europe at the same time.
عندما شعر الناس بحاجة إلى أن يستفيدوا من التقدم العلمي التجريبي، وخاضوا معركة مع بعض حالات مرت بها الكنيسة الكاثوليكية من بعض متصدريها بسبب النفوس، حالة الغضب من الصراع الذي قام بينهم بين البروتستانت، فصار لديهم حساسية تجاه كل شيء. فإذا جاء أحد من علماء الطبيعة يأتي بكلام منافي لما قررته الكنيسة، تكون ردة الفعل أعنف مما كانت عليه في السابق. هذا الصراع الذي حصل.
It was contemporaneous to events in Europe, where Europe had become a place where there were conflicting ideas, and the church, due to what had happened with Protestantism, and he said, and because of what happened, the reactions of people's egos, because of what had happened between the Catholic Church and Protestantism, any scientist who came with ideas that were conflictual with church doctrine were treated harsher than they would have been if the church hadn't been reacting.
جاءت التفاعلات التي بنيت على البروتستانتية وما بعدها إلى أن وصلنا للثورة الفرنسية. إلى أنتم تعلموني هذا التاريخ، لا داعي لأن نتحدث عنه.
Then you know what occurred after Protestantism, and then with the advent of the changes that happened in Europe leading up to the French Revolution and so on. But I don't need to discuss those. You can teach me about them and what happened with modernity and post-modernity, but you can teach me about that.
القاسم المشترك في هذه المراحل هو أن النفوس كانت تؤجج أكثر وأكثر، حظوظ النفوس.
But what occurred during that time is that people's egos were being stirred up, and each one's ego wanted to take whatever they could, their portion.
وصارت الصعوبة تزداد أن يعترف الإنسان بأنه عبد مخلوق.
And it became harder and harder for people to acknowledge their slavehood.
وأن يعيش حقيقة هذا الاعتراف.
And it became harder and harder for a human being to live the reality of their slavehood.
فأطلق العنان للثورات التي تعرفونها، الثورة الجنسية والثورة السياسية والثورات المتعددة، إلى أن شعر الإنسان بوهم الحرية، عاش وهم الحرية ووهم السعادة المتصلة بهذه الحرية، وهو عبد لنفسه، لأهوائه، لمن يستطيع أن يتلاعب بمراداته في الحرية، فهو عبد لكثير. لما أبى أن يكون عبد لواحد أصبح عبد لكثير.
So when the human being let go of restraint, through restraint to the wind, caution to the wind, and let off any restraint, we went into cultural revolutions like the sexual revolution and other revolutions like it. And what happened is that the human being then became a slave to his own caprices, his own desires, his own appetites, and whomever could appeal to these appetites. So what happened to the human being is, while thinking he was being liberated, he was becoming the slave to many, as opposed to being the slave to one.
وحصل انحراف شديد في تطور العلوم الطبيعية.
And the natural sciences took a sharp turn in the way that they were used from then on.
لا أقول أنها لم تتقدم.
I don't say that they didn't progress, but there's a
لكن بأي
distortion.
اتجاه؟
There's a distortion.
لأي غايات؟
in the goals and the reason why they
ما
were.
الموجه لاتجاهات تطورها؟
The natural sciences progressed in a way because of certain people's agendas and goals. And what they wanted
الثمار
to do
من
with them.
يجنيها؟
And who takes the fruits of those progressions in the natural sciences after.
الآثار الجانبية ما حجمها؟
And what's the collateral damage?
ما
What are the
معنى
side
هذا
effects?
الكلام؟ أن هناك منهج يجعل التقدم كبير وسريع في العلوم الطبيعية، لكن مبني على انسجام مع الكون والمقصود من الوجود، ومنهج مبني على ما تريده النفس فيشرق ويغرب، وكلما تطور كلما دمر.
What does this mean is that there was a methodology that progressed the natural sciences or let them evolve, but did so in a way that was harmonious with the natural world. And then there's another, which, because of the involvement of the ego and people's own caprice, as it advances, there's more and more destruction to the natural world.
هل كانت تدرك ماري كوري التي ضحت بحياتها في التجربة على نفسها لتحقن جسدها بالإشعاعات أن هذا الذي تفعله بنية نفع الناس والطب يوم سيكون مقدمة لكارثة في يوم من الأيام يهلك فيها أكثر من 300,000 إنسان خلال سويعات في هيروشيما وناغازاكي؟
Naikori, when she took those vials of toxins, know that what she was doing in the name of progress would lead to the atrocities that happened in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Yes, she was well intentioned, but did she know that that's what it would lead to, the horrors of Hiroshima and
ماذا
Nagasaki?
حصل هنا؟
What happened?
لماذا يسهل إلى حد كبير بل هو الأكثر والأغلب استثمار نتاج هذه الحضارة، هذا التطور للعلم الطبيعي في الشر؟
So why is it that all these progresses that happened in the natural sciences are being capitalized to do wrong, to do evil?
ما الذي افتقده في التوجيه؟
What's been lost in the direction it's taken?
التوجيه.
It's lost its direction.
لأنه نفى الحقيقة.
Because it denies there is any essential
وأراد
reality.
أن يقوم وحده في الوجود.
And it wants to stand alone in existence.
تعرفون ما النتيجة؟
Triumphant. You know what the result is?
الآن ينقلب عليه.
Now it's been the table's been turned on it.
للأسف. عندما تخلوا عن مصادر المعرفة المنقولة والمعقولة والحقائق الكشفية وقالوا فقط الحس، الآن الحس يتنمر عليه. بالأمس كانوا يقولون لم نتقدم إلا بعد أن تخلصنا من الأيديولوجيا، من العقيدة والثقافة، وجعلنا العلم قائد التجريبي. اليوم عادت أيديولوجية جديدة وتتنمر على العلم التجريبي في عقر دور العلم التجريبي، فيصبح كثير من البروفيسورات في الأحياء في مختلف التخصصات التجريبية لا يجرؤون أن يواجهوا مجموعة من الشباب المحرضين باسم الحرية ويشعرون بإرهاب، ويقام على المجتمع محاكم تفتيش في القرن 21 ومحاكمة ساحرات جديدة تنشأ. ما الذي يحصل؟ تقول عالمة إحياء تعلن عن أنها ستقيم محاضرة في جامعة في ألمانيا تثبت أنه لا يوجد إلا جنسين، تثبت علميا تجريبيا بالإحياء، فتأتيها التهديدات والاحتجاجات وتلغي الجامعة محاضرتها. ما الذي نراه اليوم؟ نرى أنه الأمر ينقلب من جديد لتكون الأيديولوجية أمام العلم التجريبي. هذا ماذا سيكون مآله؟
So we've gone from a point in time where the West, the natural sciences took precedence over the intellectual sciences, over any over ideology, over any idea about there being a world, a metaphysical world, or any metaphysical reality. There was a point where the natural sciences or the experimental method became the dominant method in the West. But the table's been turned. When I say the table's been turned, in that now we're at a point in time where the West, even though it said it's the main way to know anything is to rid ourselves of the metaphysical and concentrate on the material world and the experimental method. The experimental method is that in the West, ideology is now taking precedent, and science has been left to follow. behind ideologies. And people now who scream out in the name of freedom, who have an ideology, are now telling the scientists what to do. And now we have an inquisition in the 21st century and witch hunts going on, where scientists who want to prove an ideology wrong scientifically are being harassed and followed and terrified and terrorized, Habib said, while trying to do so. He said there was a lecturer in biology who wanted to give a lecture in Germany at a German university to prove that the genders were binary, that there was a male and female gender, that they exist in objective reality. And people picketed and people said what they said until the university had to say she can't give a lecture there.
ما الذي يحصل؟
What's going on?
تذكرون عندما قلت لكم أن الكنيسة في ذلك الوقت بدافع الغضب وهي حالة نافس كانت منفعلة تجاه علماء الطبيعة أكثر من اللازم، فأدت إلى مقدمات إشكالات. تذكرون؟
Remember I said to you earlier that the church, because of the ideological struggle it had gone through with Protestantism, was treated scientists harshly.
هو لم يكن ضد العلم، الكنيسة الكاثوليكية مفترى عليها في الكلام أنها ضد العلم.
The Catholic Church, it wasn't because the Catholic Church was anti-science. That's a lie and a false claim made
لكن
against them.
وقعوا في لحظة غضب في أيام الحروب والحالات الموجودة جعلت انفعالهم كبير.
Because of the internecine religious wars that happened in Europe at the time, it made them overreact.
اسمح لي أن نعدل تعديل بسيط، لم تكن حروبا دينية، هذا كذب علمونا إياه وصدقناه.
And so if I can make another correction, there weren't religious wars. This was a lie they taught us as children.
في التاريخ كذبوا علينا.
In history they lied to us.
لم تكن حربا دينية بين بروتستانت وكاثوليك.
There was no religious war between the Protestants and the Catholics.
كانت بين الإقطاعيين والملوك والبابا في السلطة.
It was between the feudal lords and the kings and the Pope for power. It was a power struggle.
وهم الذي وجهوها نحو الاقتتال بعد أن كان الكلام عن نصح وعن خطاب.
And they're the ones that took it to war.
كما يحصل اليوم عندنا في الشرق، في المنطقة في وسط العالم، منطقتنا اللي تسمونها أنتم الشرق الأوسط، نحن نسميها وسط العالم. في منطقتنا يقولون طائفية سنة وشيعة ومسيحيين ومسلمين، هذا كذب، ليس هذا موجودا. الموجود ساسة واقتصاد تلعب في هذا، في أفريقيا الوسطى، في غرب أفريقيا. الشركات الأوروبية التي تريد أخذ المناجم والخيرات الموجودة تدعم اتجاه ضد اتجاه وتسلحهم، إما مسيحيين ضد مسلمين أو مسيحيين من طائفة ضد مسيحيين من طائفة أو قبيلة ضد قبيلة، ليست دينية البتة، الدين فيها ثوب.
So then likewise it's happening now in our contemporary world, in the area that in the West they call the Middle East, which we call Middle Earth, middle of the world. There are wars being fought, and people will say these are religious wars, these are sectarian wars. These aren't sectarian wars, they're not religious wars. These are political and economic wars, and they're being dressed in the garment of religion. When Western companies or multinational companies want to take gold, want to take commodities, and want to have mining concessions in certain countries, they know exactly where the fault lines are, and they will know to pit tribe against tribe, or one religious group against another religious group, sometimes Christians against Muslims, Muslims against Christians, Christians from different denominations against each other, or different ethnic groups against each other, in order to get access to what they want to get access to.
من أجل الخيرات الموجودة، المناجم والطاقة.
It's for nothing other than resources such as what lies in the mines, or because of energy resources that these places have.
قبل أن تقوم أمريكا وبريطانيا باحتلال العراق عام 2003 لم يكن هناك اقتتال سني شيعي في العراق.
They said before America went into Iraq, there was
أمريكا
no...
وبريطانيا، هناك بريطانيا.
He said America and Britain, and he said, oh, did you just admit Britain because you're British? He said when America and Britain went into Iraq, before they went into Iraq, before their invasion of Iraq, there was no Sunni Shia war. There was no sectarian violence between Sunnis and Shia in Iraq.
في خلافات.
Yes, there were differences.
أحيانا مناوشات.
Yes, sometimes they go to more than just.
لكن لم نرى هذا اللي نراه اليوم.
skirmishes, but we never saw what we've seen today.
أنا لست سياسيا لهذا لن أبحر في هذا الباب.
I'm not a politician, I don't want to go too far into this. I just want to use it as proof of something else, as evidence. I just want to cite it as
قلنا في
evidence.
السابق كانت المسألة غضب عند الكنيسة.
We said in the past the issue was the church's anger at what had happened before.
مقترن بشيء من شهوة البقاء.
Coupled with the desire to remain in power.
اليوم الأيديولوجية الجديدة التي تريد أن تصطدم مع العلم، الشهوة هي الغالبة عندها مع قدر من الغضب.
But this new ideology that now wants to go into a dialectic or a conflict with science, it's mostly led by caprice with some element of anger in it. Anger is not the dominating element.
الإنسان لديه شهوة بهيمية ورغبة سبوعية. من السبوعية الغضب والتسلط، والشهوة البهيمية فيها الطعام والشراب والنكاح والبقاء إلى آخره. السابق كان الأساس الغضب مع شيء من الشهوة. اليوم الشهوة مع شيء من الغضب.
So within the human being, there's two aspects of his physical nature. One of them is what they call the shahwa al-bahimiyya, which means the animalistic instincts, more related to domestic and herbivorous animals. So things like the need to eat, the need to procreate, the need to survive and continue your genus. And then there's what they call the predatory instinct, which activates the power of anger in man and the will to dominate others. These are called the predatory instincts. So we're saying in the past it was more the predatory instinct that moved the church, mobilized the church to be overly aggressive against science. Today it's more the appetites that have made people aggressive to come into this conflict with science.
ما هو أكثر شيء يجلي ضياع الإنسان عندما يصبح عبدا لنفسه؟ تدرون ما يؤلم بشدة وهو يجلي مدى ذل الإنسان أمام نفسه عندما يصبح خاضعا لها.
You know, the painful thing that makes it apparent how humiliating a human being looks when he becomes a slave of his own caprice.
أنه يضيع كل شيء، العقل والحس والذوق كله يذهب.
He loses everything, his intellect, his sense, and his taste. Everything goes.
لما ناتي نسمع واحد يقول أنا فلان أحب أن تعرفوني شيء.
A person comes and says, my name is so and so, but I'd like you to know me as she, to give me the gender pronoun of she.
أكيد أنت حر بينك وبين ربك، ما لنا دخل فيه. لكن أنا ليش أنا أقول لك شيء وأنا أشوفك هي؟ أنت حر وأنا حر.
You're free, it's between you and your Lord, but why should I call you she when I can see you as a he? I'm free, you're free.
إذا أنت حر أنك تريد أنك شيء، أنا حر إني أشوفك هي.
You're free to be she, I'm free to see you as he.
كيف لما واحد لمجرد إنه طلعت في راسه وقرر إنه يوقع شيء يسمح له يدخل على الحريم النساء في أماكن خلع ثيابهن وهن يشتكين يقولوا ما نريد نرى آلة ذكورية قدامنا ونحن نخلع الثياب. هذا له حق ذيلا ما لهن حقوق.
He said, then what right does someone who decides he wants to be known as she to go into a woman's changing room because he's decided to be known as she? And the women in there are protesting, saying we don't really want to see his male genitalia in front of us exposed. So does his rights take precedence over their rights?
ما الحالة هذا؟ بمعنى حتى نكران الحس لصالح ماذا؟ لصالح النفس، لصالح الهوى.
So, what is this? Because we're going against our very senses, because the evidence is, it's self-evident from our sensory perception what that person is, but we're being made to go even against that. And who is this for? It's for nothing more than the ego.
تركتم الوحي، تركتم الكشف، تركتم العقل، القواعد العقلية، بقي لكم هو هذا الحس، حتى هذا بتضيعون.
We've left intellect as a civilization. We've left unveiling. We've left revelation. all we've got left is our sensory perception, our sensorium, and now we want to even leave that behind.
طب ما الذي يبقى؟
What's left?
الأهواء.
Caprice.
لماذا؟ للحرية والسعادة، صحيح؟
Why? For freedom and happiness, right?
هاتان الخصلتان.
For these two.
هذا الذي يدعي أنها حرية هو عبد لنفسه.
But the person who says it's for freedom and liberation is a slave to themselves.
ولأنه لم يتحرر من عبوديته لهوى نفسه هو عبد لكل شيء حوله، عبد للإعلام، عبد للحركات والناشطين، عبد للسياسيين الذين يريدون يستغلونه في الانتخابات، عبد للشركات الاقتصادية، عبد للشركات العابرة للقارات التي تريد تستخدم قضيته، هو عبد لكل هؤلاء. عبد للشركات الطبية التي تتكسب من وراء العمليات، وكل هذا هو عبد لهم. نوعيات الأدوية هو عبد لكل هؤلاء، وهو يظن أنهم يخدمونه. حر قرر فهم خدم له، وهو سيكون سعيدا. أي سعادة أن تكون عبد لكل الناس إلا المستحق للعبودية، أن تعبده مستحق العبودية.
This person who's become a slave to himself, by extension, has become a slave to everything. He's become a slave to the media, a slave to the politicians, a slave to the influencers, a slave to the activists, a slave to the multinational companies who want to use his issue to further their own agendas, a slave to the pharmaceutical companies who want to use that agenda in order to push their medicines, a slave to the medicine who. Or people involved in medicine who want to do those operations because of the financial returns involved. So this person who's claiming to be free has now become not only a slave to himself but a slave to everyone else's benefit and everyone else's agenda. Because he's left slavehood to the one who's deserving it.
هذه العبودية غريبة متبادلة. تجد الساسة المفترض أنهم مؤتمنين على قيم البلاد، على مستقبل البلاد، على رخاء البلاد، على أمان البلاد، هو يهمه من سيعطيه صوته. فإذا هذا اللوبي بيعطي صوته وهذا اللوبي بيعطي صوته يرمي بكل شيء للبلاد.
So that this slavehood is one that's in a constant state of flux, because even the politician who is entrusted to and is left responsible with the running of a country or being in government will leave principles and leave his trust if he needs to gain the votes of one group over another.
سبحان الله من ينقطع عن الصلة به يفقد خصيصة الإنسانية الأولى وهي الحياة.
Said, glory be to God, the one who loses his connection to him loses the first thing which is unique to the human being, which is the attribute of modesty.
إذا لم تستحي فاصنع ما شئت.
The Prophet ﷺ said, if you have no shame, do what you will.
هذا مجمل ما له علاقة بالحاجة. طيب أنت جبت لنا للواقع وقلت لنا أنه ليس ردة فعل. لا، ليس ردة فعل، لكن الذي وصل إليه الواقع جزء منه نحن نتحمل مسؤوليته أمام الله عندما توقفنا نحن عن أن نشارك العالم في الفكر، في الفلسفة، في الرؤية الوجودية، في مواكبة مسير العالم من خلال ما لدينا. لا أقول نقود العالم كما تسمعون في هتافات الإسلاميين السياسيين، لا، أقول نشارك العالم ما لدينا. الشراكة الإنسانية في مطبخ صناعة الفلسفة المقبلة. الآن ما بعد الحداثة تنتهي، تهوي، وكل هذا الذي ترونه من فوضى لا تقلقوا منها، لا تزعجكم، لا تخيفكم، قليل وستنتهي في فراقيع، يعني تفرقع في الهواء، لا قيمة لها، لا أرضية لها. بس اثبتوا بأخلاق وبأدب. هذا كله منتهي، الصوت والضجيج كله منتهي. المهم هو علامة على سقوط ما بعد الحداثة، هوية خلاص أفلست، العدمية جعلتها تأكل نفسها. العالم سيقبل على مطبخ جديد لمرحلة أخرى من النظرة للكون، من التعامل مع الوجود. الحاجة هي أن يأتي هذا الوقت ولدينا شيء نقدمه لهذا العالم، نعذر أمام الله ونؤدي مهمة قائمة على الرحمة المهداة، على الصلة بالرحمة المهداة صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم. هذا واجب فرض كفاية، وعندما لا يقام به يصبح فرض عين على من يمكن أن يقوم به.
You asked me the first thing I said was this work was essential, and some will say, but you're talking, and you said it was a non-reaction, and you're telling us about the contemporary world. It's still a non-reaction, but the point is that our halting, our studies and the evolution of these sciences is something that we will be questioned for before Allah, because we need to have a contribution to the world around us. And I'm not saying that we should lead, as some voices say with their slogans, but we need to contribute to what is brought together for the future. What we see around us now with the cacophony we see around us is just smoke screens and firecrackers, and they're nothing but, if they're anything, they're just a declaration of a civilization in crisis. They're a declaration of a crisis in terms of what modernity is going through and post-modernity is going through. It's a nihilist void that's now swallowing itself. But before the noise we hear and the cacophony, we just need to stand firm and understand that we need to have a contribution towards what goes on in the future. And we need to have answers for the challenges people will have by doing the work we're doing, such as this, because this is, like was said before, this is a fard kifaya. It's a communal obligation. If those capable of doing it undertake to do that work, then the rest of the community is not considered to be doing a wrong by not doing that work. Otherwise it becomes a fard ayn, it becomes an individual responsibility for everyone.
هذا فيما يتعلق بالحاجة، وسامحوني إذا استرسلت. بالنسبة للمسار باختصار هو مسار قائم على مزج بين علوم المعقولات والحقائق النابعة عن تنور القلب من ثمرات السير إلى الله عز وجل، وصحيح الحكمة الفلسفة القائمة على منهجية لا سفسطائية ولا فوضى. هذه الثلاثة لا نتعامل معها على أساس الآن نطرحها من حيث المعقول، وهذه نطرحها من حيث الحكمة، وهذه نطرحها من حيث الحقائق. لا، على أساس تكامل هذه العلوم وتمازج هذه العلوم لتنطق بجسم واحد بروح واحد.
So what we need is, like, it's a
مسار.
The direction we need to take is to bring these sciences together, to coalesce together the intellectual or the rational sciences, along with the fruits of the path taken to reach direct experiential knowledge, along with wisdom. But when I say wisdom, I'm not talking about sophistry, but real wisdom with a foundation. And so that these sciences aren't studied as, here are the rational sciences, here is wisdom or hermeticism, and here is mysticism. No, it's to bring them all together soundly.
هذه الثلاثة العلوم كانت هذا الجهد، ثلاثة الأبحاث التي طبع منها بحثان، والثالث إن شاء الله في طريقه، بحث سيدي مصطفى، وينتهي المشروع الأول ليبتدئ الآن الخطوة الثانية في هذا المشروع، وهي ترجمة هذه اللبنات وهذا الجهد إلى أبحاث قوية تطبق هذه الأوليات، هذه المبادئ، هذه الأطروحات على ما يحيط بنا، على ما فيه تفاعل في يومياتنا، في مستقبلنا.
So these three aspects being brought together are what these three papers are about. Well, two of them have already been published, and a third is in publication. And then that's the first step, to bring these necessary principles forward. And the next step would be to build upon them with research papers in order to actualize them in the world around us.
يتصل ذلك بعلوم الطريق المتعلقة بالسلوك، بالتزكية، مراتب النفس السبعة، عقبات الطريق السبعة التي أوردها حجة الإسلام في منهاج العابدين، مراتب مقامات اليقين التسعة أو العشرة، أحوال المحبة التي ترد على الأرواح. صلة هذه بما يعمل مع صلة بنورانية النصوص القرآنية، الاستضاءة بدلالات الحق سبحانه وتعالى، انغماس وامتزاج بخطاب القرآن، امتزاج بالقراءة المتبصرة للسنة النبوية، تدبر القرآن وقراءة متبصرة بالنصوص المحمدية التي تحمل دلالات تستطيع من خلال هذه العلوم أن تشق الطريق فيها. كان سيدي كريم لفت نظري قبل أمس ونحن نتذاكر إلى شعب الإيمان وكيفية مد الجسور نحو شعب الإيمان وتفعيل معانيها وعمقها لتنتظم في هذا الإطار، لتكون متصلة بالعمل وتحمل شيء من الأثقال الزائدة التي حملتها المقاصد الخمسة. هكذا كان المعنى الذي تقصده.
الشيخ موسى كان معه.
الشيخ موسى كان كذلك. أنتم والشيخ موسى ذكرتم شعب الإيمان. بتضحك علي، عاد قليل ذاكرة معي، عاد في قليل ذاكرة معي. المفهوم هذا سيدي موسى وسيدي كريم كل هذا درس كله في السلوك. هذا المفهوم يتكامل مع بعض. الذي يجلس ويقرأ منكم نصا في البخاري أو يجلس ويقرأ منكم حزبا من القرآن هو يستجلي ما يشتغل به في مجال تخصصه الأكاديمي. كنت أقرأ قوله سبحانه وتعالى: والله يريد أن يتوب عليكم ويريد الذين يتبعون الشهوات أن تميلوا ميلا عظيما يريد الله أن يخفف عنكم وكان الإنسان ضعيفا. تأملوا هاتين الآيتين وانظروا إلى ما يحيط بكم. انظروا كم تترجم هاتين الآيتين وكم تعالج. والله يريد أن يتوب عليكم ويريد الذين يتبعون الشهوات أن تميلوا ميلا عظيما يريد الله أن يخفف عنكم. الإقرار بالضعف هو المفتاح. هذه ملامح للمسار تتصل بها أبحاث، تتصل بها ورقات ومقالات، تتصل بها ملخصات تحليلية، تتصل بها دورات. والفقير أمام الآخرين أقول لك يا سيدي كريم، يا سيدي حسن، وين سيدي مصطفى؟ سيدي مصطفى أصحاب الفنون الذين صنفوا كان من الأشياء التي يتقربون إلى الله بها أن يقرئوا ما صنفوا. والفقير أود وأرجوكم وألح عليكم، أعزم عليكم أن يكون لكم إقراء لهذه كما تقرأ المتون. هذا جهد أكرمكم الله به ووفقكم له سنوات طويلة من العمل الثقيل. لا أرى أنه من الكافي أن تصل النسخ إلى الباحثين ويقال لهم اقرأوا تعالوا نتناقش. هذه مرحلة لا بأس. الفقير أود أن يكون هناك مجالس إقراء لهذه الكتب. البعض قد يستصعب ذلك للغة أكاديمية أو فلسفية. الشيخ الرئيس كان يجلس ويقرأ كتبه ابن سينا. يعني فكرة الإقراء وتفكيك العبارة والدلالة على المقصود والإحالة على كتب فتح مجال للمباحثة ينشئ بنية لدى من يتعامل مع المشروع. هذا المسار أن يكون لنا شراكات مع مؤسسات أخرى تحمل هذا الهم. هذا الهم لا تستطيع مؤسسة أن تنتهض به وحدها، وهو لا ينسب إلى مؤسسة فقط. أما النقطة الأخيرة وهي نقطة الثمرات المرجوة عظيمة. وما دامت أنا نسيت لكن ما شاء الله عليه كريم. اسمه ده سيدي وائل بيجي عليها.
Ibadi said, to begin with, he said, so the direction it needs to take has to be tied to the path of wayfaring and the 7 degrees of the soul that the human soul goes through in its elevation, in its evolution, and the 7 stations that Imam al-Ghazali also spoke about in the book The Way of the Worshipper, Manhaj al-Abidin of Imam al-Ghazali, the 7 obstacles that the wayfarer goes through on their path to God. That Imam Ghazali spoke about in his book, The Way of the Worshipper, and also the 10 stations of certainty. And then the combination of that with the luminous truths that are encapsulated in scripture, in both the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, through the person immersing themselves in those texts and in the understanding of these texts and seeing the luminosity of those texts. Habib Ali said he was reflecting on a verse where Allah says that He deigns
نعم والله يريد أن يتوب عليكم.
And Habib Ali said a few days ago, I was reflecting on the verse where God says, and Allah deigns that He repents, allows you to repent.
ويريد الذين يتبعون الشهوات أن تميلوا ميلا عظيما.
And those who follow their caprices want you to incline incline greatly.
يريد الله أن يخفف
And Allah says, and Allah deigns to lessen your load.
الإنسان ضعيف.
And the human being is weak. And he said that the reality there is to understand the reality of our own weakness.
وخلق الإنسان ضعيفا.
And the human being was created weak.
يريد الله أن يخفف عنكم وخلق الإنسان ضعيفا.
Allah says, the verse is, and Allah deigns to lighten your burden, and the human being was created weak. So it's to take that path and actualize the realities of that path which are signified in our scripture, which the scripture speaks about and it's signified therein. That Habib Ali said, as we do this work and we go forward, this isn't just the work of one institution. This is a work that we have to work together in partnership. And he also said that he requests of those who undertook this great work, and it was a burdensome undertaking, that they also sit and start teaching these works in teaching circles where they will sit and explain and elaborate on the works that they did, because that's also part of our tradition. The scholars who wrote great books would also sit with circles of students and teach these books. And some might come up and say, but this is really for specialists, it's quite hard to unravel.
أكاديمي فلسفي.
It's for academics, it's for philosophers, but he said the great Ra'is, as Ibn Avikna was known, he said he would sit with his circles of students and read his canons and his books. Whenever he authorized the work, he would also sit and have circles where he and his students would read.
كل من لقيتهم من الأشياخ الذين أقرأوا مصنفاتهم لم أجد واحدا منهم كان يعتقد أن مصنفه يستحق الإقراء.
And none of my teachers who I've met, who wrote a book and used to teach their books, would tell their student, would say that their books were deserving of being read.
لكنه كان يقرأه.
But he used to stay to teach those books to keep that tradition alive. And he said, Habib also said that one of the things that Dr. Abdul Karim said to him, Laham said to him, was that we need to also find a way to bring what we have in our books about the branches of faith and live them in our reality, interface them with our realities. This one. And Sidi Abdul Karim said that it was also, and Habib Ali said another point, and Sidi Abdul Karim then said it was Musa Ferber who also said that point, and Habib Ali said, you think I don't remember who said what? So you both said something, and but then Habib Ali said Karim negating himself at that point was itself an example of the path.
أخيرا مسألة الثمرة المرجوة على المعنى العام على العالم الكون ما كنا نتكلم عنه من الشراكة مع العالم في المرحلة المقبلة، شراكة مسؤولة حقيقية. فيما يتعلق بالشأن العام.
We were talking about
ثمرة آخر نقطة.
the last thing we spoke about was the fruit, and in general what we want to do is to work in partnership with the others who live in this world, who share this world with us, to face the challenges we're all facing together. These are universals.
وعلى مستوى المسلمين.
And also for the Muslims.
أن نهيئ للأجيال المقبلة مسلكاً.
To leave a path for the generations coming up.
يجدون فيه صلتهم بالله عز وجل قريبة.
They find that their connection to God is close at hand. They find an easy
على
access.
التعامل مع ما يحيط بهم دون تشنج ولا ضعف.
And they'll be able to interact with those around them without being too rigid and without being weak, without being too compromising either.
ونهيئ شيء نربي عليه أجيالنا المقبلة هويتهم.
And we can create
حالهم
something.
صلتهم بالله.
We can create a means to nurture the generations coming up in forging an identity for them, but also their state and their connection to the divine presence.
والثمرة الثالثة وهي الأساس للثمرتين.
The third fruit, which is the foundation of the other two fruits.
ثمرة تتعلق بكل فرد منا.
It's a fruit that's connected to every individual.
أن يكون ربانيا.
So that they be godly.
أن يستطيع النظر إلى المحسوس فيرى عالم الملكوت من وراء الملك.
That the human being reaches a point where they can look on the tangible world through their sensory organs, their sense perceptions, and see that the world of the divine kingdom, as it's called in our tradition, is connected to the spiritual or angelic world beyond it.
وأن يتنزل إلى عالم الملك بالمشاهد الملكوتية.
And that the human being can descend into the world of the divine kingdom, the physical world, after having witnessed realities in the angelic or spiritual world.
وأن يعيش معنى الترقي بالأنفاس.
So that the human being can understand what it is to become elevated breath by breath in every moment, to have a new and fresh elevation.
وأن يترقى في خطرات قلبه مدركا الفرق بين الخاطر الملكي والشيطاني والرباني والنفساني.
And that the human being can elevate even the notions that come to their hearts, so that the human being can actually differentiate between a notion that's a diabolical insinuation, an egotistical notion, a divine inspiration or an angelic
من
inspiration.
خلال النظرة المستقرة للوجود والمقصود من وجوده والجدية في تزكية النفس يستطيع أن يكون مستقرا مع ما حوله بأسرته بمجتمعه بمن يحيط به فيصبح شمس مشرقة في هذا الوجود محمد.
Human being is settled and balanced in this way, that the human being can be balanced with the world that they interact with around them, with their own families, with everyone that interacts with them, so that the human being becomes Muhammadan.
إذا دخل المختبر في طب أو في كيمياء أو في أحياء أو في هو يستشعر معنى العبودية لله فيما يجليه الله له مرتبط بالمقاصد القدسية، فهو في عبادة كأنه في قيام الليل وصيام نهار وهو في مختبره، ليس بالكلام الذي نسمعه في الخطب، لا تحققا.
So that human being, even when working in a laboratory, whether it's a chemistry laboratory or he's a biologist or a chemist or a physicist, that human being sees that he is actually in a state of worship while working in the laboratory, not just as a slogan that we say, but as a reality, so that the human being doesn't see that what he's doing there is much different to standing up in night praying.
عندما يطلق مركبة فضائية إلى القمر أو مسبارا إلى المريخ أو قمرا صناعيا هو مستشعر المقصود من وراء ذلك وماذا يريد منه، فلا يخلف قمامة فضائية كالتي يشتكي العالم اليوم منها في المدار، ولا متصل بمقاصد عالية من وراء ذلك، متصلة بالعالم الذي قال للحاكم الذي موله إنما حملني على هذا العمل بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله.
So that human being, even if he was to work be part of the team that launches a satellite or a shuttle into space or a probe onto Mars, that human being will also be cognizant of the fact that they have a responsibility not to leave debris in space and remnants of shuttles and satellites floating around in space, because the person feels that they have a responsibility to the cosmos around them. Like that scholar said, that scientist said to the ruler who was his patron, when he said to him, what's made me do this is to follow what's been revealed by God in his prophet.
لا يرى عمله أهم ولا أولى من عمل الفلاح الذي يفلح في الأرض، والمكنس الذي يكنس الشارع، والمسلك الذي يسلك المجاري. يرى أن كل منا على وظيفة. المقام الأعلى لمن صدق الله وأتقن ابتغاء مرضات الله على وجه المقاصد التي أقام الله عليها الوجود. هذه نتيجة ننتظرها من هذا الكلام الفلسفي العميق. نعم، لأنه إعادة ترتيب فهمنا للمقصود، من إعادة بنية من جديد.
And such a person won't see their job or their vocation or their responsibility as anything greater than the farmer in his field, or the street cleaner, or the sewage technician, or anyone else. And Rudy said, and you see this as being the fruit of this? Yes, and fruits, even greater fruits, as the fruit of this, because we're recalibrating the human being and the perception.
أن يدرك أن كل هؤلاء في حاجة إلى الذي في الخلوة يتوجه إلى الله ويبكي ويروض نفسه ويستجلي فضل الله ويستمطر رحمة الله وهو في خلوته، لا يؤبه له ولا يلتفت إليه. رب أشعث أغبر لو أقسم على الله لا أبره. تكلمني في مركز أكاديمي في أكسفورد تقول لي في خلوة، نعم أقول لك ذلك. لن تعود البوصلة إلا بهذا الفهم، أن الذي يجلس يقرأ فروض الوضوء نواقض الوضوء لا يقل أهمية عمن يخترع المصل الدوائي للجائحة، لا يقل أهمية عمن يكنس الشارع، لا يقل أهمية عمن يقوم بوظيفة قضاء، لا يقل. بمعنى أن كل واحد قيمته في إتقانه ما يقوم به مقاصدا وفعلا سلوكا.
I say that they don't see any less importance to the other people, including the person who's in a hermetic chamber, just in a state of worship, calling on God and beseeching God to bring down the rains. And they'll understand that some of the bounties they're in is because there are people like that who sit in a hermitage and pray. And I said, you say this in an academic setting? Yes, I say this in an academic setting because we need to reorientate the compass. The compass needs reorientating, and that no one should see themselves as greater or less than anyone else. It's about who is more sincere and who understands the overarching purposes of the faith and how to actualize them in reality.
وإذا سألتم الفقير ما الذي يشغله من كل المقاصد والثمرات المرجوة، إذا أحببتم أن تعرفوا ما هي أوليات مقاصده في هذه الخدمة، أرجو أن يصح ذلك لي، أن ترتسم بسمة على الوجه الشريف في نفس من أنفاسه صلى الله عليه وسلم، رضا بها الخدمة وقبولا لها. فقط هذا ما أنتظره من هذا العمل، أنه عندما يعرض على الحبيب الأعظم صلى الله عليه وسلم في حجرته ولو لنفس واحد من أنفاسه، وهو عظيم بالكون والزمان والمكان والزمكان كله، نفس من أنفاسه يتبسم سرورا بهذه الخدمة، هذا يكفي. من يدرك منكم هذا المعنى؟ لا، من يذوق هذا المعنى في مطالعته، في دراسته، في تدريسه، في جهده، في عمله، سيريه الله عجبا.
What is it that I wish for out of all of this, I'll say to you that, if you'll allow me, I'll say to you that I wish if the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam just smiles in satisfaction at this work that we're doing, even for a moment, because a moment of his satisfaction and his smile is worth everything. Say a moment of his in time and space, and then he said in time space together, is worth everything. And any of you who understands what that's actually worth and experiences what that's worth will see wonders in any work they undertake. In any endeavor they undertake, they'll see wonders.
جعلوا إدخال السرور على قلبه مقصد عالي فيكم. الله ورسوله أحق أن ترضوه يقول الله عز وجل. لم يقل ترضوهما لاتحاد الرضا.
Let bringing joy to his heart be your aim, because Allah says Allah and his Prophet are the ones who are worthy of being pleased. And he said, he didn't say both worthy of being pleased, he said of being pleased as one, because the Prophet's pleasure is totally harmonized with God's pleasure.
اللهم أوصل عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم تحية وسلاما. اللهم أوصل عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم تحية وسلاما. اللهم أبلغ عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم تحية وسلاما. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم خيرا. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ما هو أهله. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم خيرا. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ما هو أهله. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم خيرا. جزا الله عنا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم ما هو أهله. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام عليك أيها النبي ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام علينا وعلى عباد الله الصالحين. تقبل اللهم هذا الجهد وبارك في إخوتنا القائمين عليه، في من سعى وفي من خدم وفي من قدم وفي من بذل وفي من كان سببا وراء هذا الخير، وتقبل من الجميع. وارنا اللهم ثمراته الباطنة وثمراته الظاهرة، ولا تجعل سوس أنفسنا يأكل ثماره. اللهم إنا نستودعك هذا الخير فأرنا ثماره في الدنيا وفي البرزخ وفي يوم القيامة. بارك في إخوتنا الذين اجتمعوا في هذه الأيام في هذه الخلوة العلمية، بركة تظهر على قلوبهم بمضاعفات من أنوار المعرفة، وعلى أرواحهم بمعارج من المحبة والمحبوبية، وعلى عقولهم بمفسيح ميادين التفكر والتدبر، وعلى أنفسهم بمعارج التزكية، وعلى أسرارهم بأنوار المشاهدة، وعلى ذواتهم بالعبودية المحضة، وعلى أجسادهم بالاستقامة على الطاعة والخدمة. وارتضينا لذلك بغير سابقة امتحان ولا ابتلاء يا حي يا قيوم. وارفع البلاء والفتن والمحن والجوائح ما ظهر منها وما بطن، وعجل الفرج يا حي يا قيوم. اللهم ارتضينا لخدمة هذا الدين، وابسط بسط الهداية في المشارق والمغارب، وارتضينا في خدمة ذلك مع كمال اللطف والعافية. افتح لنا فتوح العارفين وفقهنا في الدين، واجعلنا من الأولياء الصالحين العلماء العارفين العاملين الدعاة الناصحين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. وفرج عن كل مكروب من أمته صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم، أمة الإجابة وأمة الدعوة، عن كل مكروب في الأرض بطولها والعرض يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين يا أرحم الراحمين. بسر أسرار الفاتحة وإلى حضرة النبي صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم.